Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar for the fiscal year 2017 International Research and Studies Program. We're very excited that you can join us, but we are even more excited because this program is very special in that it has not competed since 2009, so we are very happy that you've expressed interest in applying and submitting an application, and we wish you all the best in this competition. In my office with me are my colleagues, Carolyn Collins, Kathleen Connors de Laguna, and our super intern for the summer, Angela He. Just to give you an overview about IFLE, and also on the phone, I am sure, is our Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary, Lenore Yaffe Garcia. To give you an overview of the International and Foreign Language Education Office, because I think there are many of you who are interfacing with us for the very first time in response to this competition announcement. But the International and Foreign Language Education Office is an office of 18 individuals, and the staff here administers the programs authorized under Title VI of the Higher Education Act, and we also administer the programs authorized under the Fulbright-Hays program. Our overarching mission has these 5 activities. We administer the Title VI domestic programs and the Fulbright-Hays overseas programs to respond to the ongoing national need for individuals with expertise and competence in world languages and area or international studies. We also, through our programs and our activities, we advance national security by developing a pipeline of highly proficient linguists and experts in critical world regions. We also contribute to the developing a globally competent workforce able to engage with a multilingual, multicultural clientele at home and abroad. Our programs attempt to expand access to international and foreign language learning, especially for traditionally underserved and underrepresented students. And we support teaching and research on critical world regions, languages, and issues. So through the 10 programs that are active, these are the activities that we do. And I mention this because the International Research and Studies Program ties into what we are attempting to do in training and research. So today's webinar, we're going to cover the following topics as they relate to this competition. We're going to talk about the International Research and Studies Program purpose. We will identify the eligible applicants, the types of projects that this competition supports, the level of funding, the estimated level of funding for 2017, the competition priorities, the application sections as they are submitted into grants.gov, the selection criteria for these projects. We will talk about the funding categories, the line item categories in an IRS budget. We will talk about some selected definitions that have applicability to these projects, the appendices that you are required to send in with your application, the various federal forms and certifications, some application tips, and an overview of the selection process. What happens after your application comes into the department, how we handle it, and the peer review process. We will also have Q&A at the end of the session. The purpose of the International Research and Studies Program is to conduct research and studies to determine the needs for increased or improved instruction in modern foreign languages, area studies, and other international fields. I want to make it clear that this is the purpose that's in the legislation, because I anticipate, or I can envision that some of you are saying, I thought they're not asking for applications for instruction or instructional materials. That is true, but what this slide is showing you that the overarching purpose of the International Research and Studies Program is to do this particular thing, and that's in the law. In the application that you downloaded from grants.gov or the one that I sent to you, there are some overarching competition definitions. We announced competitive preference priorities. One of them focuses on dual language immersion program. And by definition, within the context of this competition, we are defining a dual language immersion program as means a program that includes native English-speaking students and native speakers of a foreign language. The goals of a DLI program are to develop bilingualism, biliteracy, academic achievement, and cross-cultural competencies for all students. Students learn content through both their native language and the target language. So that's the definition. That doesn't confine you to the kinds of projects that you can submit. This is the definition, and I will move into what the notice also said about what you're allowed to submit. But this is the operating definition. Another operating definition in the notice is what global competence means. It means the acquisition of in-depth knowledge and understanding of international issues, an appreciation of an ability to learn and work with people from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds. It means proficiency in foreign language or languages, and skills to function productively in an interdependent world community. And the last definition that was in the notice that we want to call your attention to is the meaning of international education. It means teaching and learning about other world regions. It is generally understood to include, but is not limited to, knowledge of other world regions, cultures, and global issues. It means proficiency in communicating in languages other than English, working in global or cross-cultural environments, and it also includes study abroad. So those are working definitions. Now, when you're looking at the project that you're proposing to submit to us, we were very clear, and I'm going to give you page numbers that you can go back to after the seminar, after our time is complete. If you go back to the notice in the application, we use language such as, this is the realm, these are the activities, and we specifically said that topics may include but are not limited to. So this gives you free range, so to speak, that using the definitions that I gave you, you apply them to the activities that are listed in the notice. So you are not confined to say, oh, I have to write a proposal that is shoehorned into those 3 or 4 definitions. That's not what we're saying. We are telling you that you have a wide range of topics that you can respond to or cover in your proposal as those topics relate to dual language immersion, or as these topics relate to the outcomes of international education. So please refer to pages 20 and 21 to give you the scope of activities that you're allowed to submit an application for. The funding for this competition, and I've received a lot of questions because the way we have to put this information into a notice is not necessarily customer-friendly or public-friendly. So going through these different types of funding or the information here, the estimated available funds, our office has a total of $712,329 for this competition. That's our pot of money. That's what we are working with. The estimated range of awards, and I would not, and I'm advising, don't pay too much attention to that. When we do our calculations and put these notices together, bear in mind that other offices have to review them and they give input. And so our budget office advised us this is the range for an average size of, or average range of awards for this program, 40,000 to 107,761. We are not suggesting to you that you have to have your budget fall in here. This is just the parameters of the funding. The same for the estimated average size of an award. That's the estimated average size per year. The maximum award is what you need to pay attention to, because when you build your budget for this project, you will be requesting the budget to cover your project for either 1 year. If your research project is just 12 months long, then you will submit a budget for just 1 year. If you're proposing activities that require 24 months or 2 years, then you will have a budget and you can have a maximum for each of those years of 101,761. So if you submit a budget just for 12 months and you want to go for the moon and you want to ask IFLE for the full amount, then for 12 months, your budget will show 101,761 for 1 year. If you are going to develop a budget for 2 years, then your budget that comes into us would be twice, the 101,761 plus another 101,761 if you want to go for the maximum. And I would suggest that you do. That's not saying we will give you the maximum, but it's best to ask for more. Well, let me back up. Best to go for the maximum, knowing that the government will not give you. It's better to ask for more and not get it than to not have asked for it and need it. So, and if you have 3 years in your budget, for each of those 3 years, you can ask for a maximum of 101,761. We anticipate making 10 awards. Again, because of funding constraints, having not competed this program for since 2009, we're very pleased to have the 712,329. So we envision being able to support 7 to 10 projects. So that tells you how highly competitive this competition is. And again, the project period is up to 36 months, and the up to is government speak. So the project period is 36 months or 3 years. Eligible applicants under the IRS program, you may apply, you may submit an application as a single institution, you may submit an application as a consortium of institutions, you may submit an application all by yourself, Mr. Smith or Ms. Smith. As long as you are submitting that application, that is still for a research project, a study, or a survey. By individual, that does not mean that the program awards monies to an individual to support their higher education costs or for a purpose that's outside of the scope of what we're looking for. But you are absolutely allowed to submit a research project, a study, or a survey as an individual. Organizations may submit an application, and public and private agencies. Again, to reiterate that the absolute priority for this competition, we are inviting applications for research projects, surveys, and studies. In the past, with healthier funding, we were able to invite applications for instructional materials development in addition to the research projects, surveys, and studies. But we have limited this competition to these types of projects. Which brings us to the competitive, within the absolute priority, within the research studies, within the research project studies and surveys, we are looking for projects that respond or address these particular priorities, one or the other. Your project can focus on research project studies and surveys, focus on dual language immersion, a DLI program in United States, in U.S. preschools to grade 12 schools. That is worth an additional 5 points. Or you may submit an application that's going to investigate or look at the outcomes of international education programs for U.S. post-secondary students. So you have the choice of choosing one or the other of those priorities. Now, you might be asking, well, can one organization submit 2 applications? Yes, you may. You may submit an application that responds to that first priority. You may also submit an application that responds to the second. When you submit your application, everything goes into the grants.gov site. It does not come into the IFLE office. And so grants.gov, the template has very specific parts, very specific pots where you will put these documents into that particular pot on grants.gov. For the first part, you will be submitting your standard form 424 and the supplemental information form for the standard 424. And if you have questions on those, I can take questions on those at the end of the session. I'm just trying to get through the various parts on grants.gov. But the standard 442 form, as you may know, or those who may not know, that's the government's cover sheet for the application, where you provide the name of the institution, your name, your county, the type of application, et cetera. Part 2 in grants.gov is where you submit the Education Department Form 524, and that's the budget form. That's the form that has the grid that shows personnel, friends, supplies, travel, et cetera. And if you see parens section A, you're required to submit only section A because this program is not a cost-sharing or cost-matching program, so you do not need or you're not required to submit summary section B. You might see that summary section B is part of the grants.gov template, but please do not submit summary section B, because if you do, the government is required to track any funds that you report on that section B. So you will submit section A in part 2. Section 3 of the grants.gov template is where you will put your abstract. That's where you will put the bulk of your narrative that responds to the selection criteria. That's the major piece, if not the application narrative. You will include in part 3 the detailed description for your line item budget. So in part 2, you just have the grid form, the federal form, but in part 3, you will provide the detailed description for what you are requesting in the budget. And you will also include in part 3 on that template in grants.gov what is covered in the other attachment form, which are the appendices. Part 4 in grants.gov are all the assurances and certificates, certifications, such as the GEPA, the GEPA Form 427, and you see the other types of assurances that are listed there. And those are also downloadable from grants.gov, their web forms. Okay. In Part 3, what I just mentioned, the other attachment forms, the appendices, these pieces of information will be put into Part 3. That's your curriculum vitae, any position descriptions. Perhaps in your project you know that there are different positions that you're going to need, but you don't have people identified for them obviously yet, but you should include a position description. Suppose you're going to have a data researcher or somebody to crunch your data, or a graduate assistant position. You should include that in Part 3 in the other attachment forms. Letters of support, and you will see that there's no number indicated there, but a reasonable number of letters of support is 3 to 5. Bearing in mind that by the time the readers get to the end of the application, they will have read a 30-plus page narrative and other information, so you want to be considerate of their reader fatigue by that time. And that's not a reflection on the expertise that we have reading these applications, but it's a reflection that everybody is human. So you want to be aware of that. Then a project timeline that aligns with your proposed project that tells what will be done when, and some indicators and some targets. So you include that in the appendices as well. And then the last item is just for persons who are submitting an application on behalf of himself or herself. You have to submit that certification of eligibility form, and those are the ED numbers are there. And it's a checklist that certifies that you do not have any federal debt for any of our fellowship programs. So if you are submitting an application on behalf of yourself, please include that last item. And again, Part 4 are the assurances and certifications. The application narrative, that we're approaching the selection criteria, but this slide is intended to give you some broad strokes about the application narrative. The recommended or suggested page limit is 30. You will notice a real change in that we're using the language of recommended or suggested, because if you go over a few pages, you're not going to be penalized for that. So just bear in mind that if after 30 pages you say, I really have some more important information to convey, I need to add 1 or 2 more pages, please know that there's no penalty for that. The recommended page limit is suggested or recommended to be 30. Now, being prudent, I wouldn't suggest that you would go 20 pages over the 30, but be prudent in adding additional pages. But there is flexibility there in the number of pages. The purpose of the application narrative is to give you a space to address the selection criteria for the program. In addressing the selection criteria, you will also, in the application narrative within these 30 or 30-some-odd pages, you will discuss, describe, integrate all of the information about the competitive preference priority that you have chosen. I want to call your attention, take this page number down, please, because I need to call your attention to something that's in the application notice that's not quite correct. Or is misleading is a better way to describe it. On page 27 of the application notice, you will see a paragraph at the top of that page that says, and I have to read this and bear with me because it's important to do this. At the top of page 27, it says, the recommended page limit does not apply to Part 1, the cover sheet, Part 2, the budget section, including the narrative budget justification, Part 4, the assurances and certifications, or the abstract. Follow the guidelines provided in the application for completing the abstract. It doesn't apply to the table of contents, and this is what I need to call your attention to. It says it does not apply to the list of priority requirements. That's misleading information that was designed by our regulatory office. So what I'm trying to say is ignore that. If you're responding to the competitive preference priorities, you should do that, must do that within the application narrative. So ignore that phrase, the list of priority requirements, because A, we don't know what that means, and B, it's not accurate. So again, in responding to the competitive preference priority, whether it's 1 or whether it's competitive preference priority 2, you will talk about either one of those in the application narrative. If you have questions about that, we can address it again at the end of the webinar. Okay. You will attach your application narrative in grants.gov to the project narrative attachment, and that's what it's called in grants.gov. So when you finish responding to the selection criteria, you will attach that to the application narrative attachment in grants.gov. And the total possible points for the application narrative, in other words, your response to the selection criteria and the points that you get for one of the priorities, the total points is 100, the total points are 110. The project abstract, and you will attach that, use the ED abstract form in grants.gov. And these are some suggestions for you about how to approach the abstract. The suggested recommended length and format, 1 page, single space. The abstract should effectively convey how the proposed project relates to the purposes of Title VI and the International Research and Studies Program. Again, the purpose of Title VI is to prepare students, teachers, the public about area studies, international studies, world languages. And the purpose of this program for this competition is to propose a research study, a survey, or a study survey or a research project. The abstract is an introduction to the reviewers. Use it to give them a clear understanding about what you intend to accomplish during the course of the proposed project, the project's intended outcomes and impact, and why the proposed project is important. When you develop your application narrative, these are the criteria that you will be addressing. And suggesting, and I suggest that you do, that you write your narrative in this order to address these particular areas: the need for the project, the usefulness of expected results, development of new knowledge, formulation of the problem and knowledge of related research, specificity of statement of procedures, the adequacy of research methodologies and the scope of project, your plan of operation, the quality of key personnel, budget and cost effectiveness, evaluation plan, adequacy of resources, and then your competitive preference priority, which is your narrative. That's just indicated there to say that you will get an additional 5 points for one of the priorities. Okay, the first criterion, need for the project, up to 10 points. Now, need for the project, you're going to address 2 bullets. Information that shows a need for the proposed project in the field of study on which the project focuses, and that the proposed project will provide information about the present and future needs of the United States for study in foreign language and other international fields. Since this competition is focusing on 2 competitive preference priorities, this second bullet is pretty much defined for you in that you will be looking at in the context of either dual language immersion or international education programs. When you think about need for the project, don't interpret that to mean what IFLE needs for the project. To me, this implies that there should be a needs assessment for this project, information that shows a need for the proposed project in the field of which that you're focusing on. So if you're looking at dual language immersion, your needs assessment should focus on that. So need is not our need for the project, but it implies needs assessment. And a needs assessment provides the following: impact. It shows you should talk about the insights about how the project can impact the beneficiaries, the clientele, participants, the teachers, whatever your beneficiary audience is. You want to talk, your needs assessment should include impact. The needs assessment should also talk about approaches, and those approaches include knowledge about the approaches that may be most effective. So you talk about that in this part of the criteria. Is there an awareness of existing programs and projects and gaps? In other words, what exists and what is needed? What are the outcomes as a result of your needs assessment? You want to talk about information about the current and existing situation that can be used to document your outcomes. Demand, knowledge about the potential demand for future programs and products. And a needs assessment includes something about credibility, that the project is serving the target audience. So again, it's not our need for the project, it's the needs assessment that informs your project. Number 2, usefulness of expected results, up to 10 points. And the results of the proposed project are likely to be used by other research projects or programs with similar objectives. I'd like to suggest that you interpret research projects, kind of substitute that with in a broader framework. use by other broader expanded beneficiaries. We're not just looking for how it will be used by other research projects. That's very narrow, keeping in mind that these regulations were written a long time ago and they have not been reauthorized. So we have to look at these criteria in a very reasonable and prudent way. So we're not looking how your project is likely to be used by other research projects. We're looking at it, how can it be used by other audiences, other people in the community, other people in the field, other beneficiaries. So think of it in a broader sense than research projects, and how other audiences, other entities have might be served by it because they have similar interests or similar objectives. So that's how you should interpret that number 2. Usefulness of expected results. How can they be used by other beneficiaries who have a similar interest in what you are describing? Development of new knowledge. In that part of your narrative, you'll talk about how the proposed project is likely to develop new knowledge that will contribute to the purposes of the international education programs. And again, not only the broad international education programs, but how it will contribute to your understanding or the external population's understanding of dual language immersion. How will it contribute to an understanding about international education programs as they affect U.S. students in post-secondary institutions? How does it contribute to underserved students at minority-serving institutions? So it's broader than this. It's more than this. So a competitive application will talk about the new knowledge as it applies not only to the mission of international education programs, but new knowledge that will advance other people's understanding and application of what you're proposing. Number 4, formulation of problems and knowledge of related research. So this is where you apply your research expertise to talk about the problems that are being addressed, the questions or hypotheses to be dealt with by the project, and that they are well formulated. There's nothing more frustrating to a reader, I would imagine, than to open a proposal and it just is not holding together. So you should be able to lay out the problems or the questions that you're proposing, your hypotheses, and in a very clear and logical manner, and the reader can say, yeah, I get it. I understand what they're trying to do with this project. It does make sense. It's well formulated, and I can get behind this. And the second one, it reflects adequate knowledge of related research. So if you're doing this as an individual or you're working with colleagues, there should be some reflection, some demonstration that you have put in your own expertise into this application and responding to the formulation of the problem. You have the knowledge and you did your homework, so to speak, in addressing this criterion. Specificity of statement of procedure, up to 5 points. Specificity and completeness of the statement of procedures to be followed, including a discussion of such components as sampling techniques, controls, data to be gathered, and statistical and other analyses to be undertaken. And this relates to a criterion that's coming up about your methods, because if you, for example, some types of methods are, surveys, interviews, focus groups, You'll talk about that later, but it relates to this in that you should be very clear and specific about those kinds of procedures. If you're going to conduct surveys, you're going to have focus groups, you're going to interview people, you need to be very clear on those particular procedures. And that you're going to, well, we're going to do random samples, other kind of samples, indirect, direct assessments. So be very clear about what you're planning to do. Be very clear on the data that you're going to gather. And you need not gather data from every corner of the world, so to speak, to make your case. You don't want to overburden or cloud or jumble up your focus. Gather the data that is necessary to inform the project and to let the readers know this is why we have decided on these data sets. So you don't need to cover the whole waterfront in your data, but be very clear about the data to be gathered and the analyses to be undertaken. The adequacy of your research methodology and the scope of the project. This talks about, methodology has different terms, whether you call it a method, a methodology, the activities, the procedures or strategies, whatever you call it, this should be very clear and you should provide a sound justification for what you are proposing. The method should be understandable, and it should be accompanied by an explanation of the rationale for the chosen method. Again, methods can be surveys, interviews, focus groups. Why do you think these particular strategies will work? Why did you hone in on these rather than something else? Your justification should include a description of your past work in this area. So you talk about your past work, your expertise that brings to bear on the method, and or you can present evidence drawn from others in the field. So I, as the applicant, I have knowledge about this because I have been in this field for X number of years. I have even done past studies on the effects of study abroad on minority students, but my expertise is this. I have also consulted other knowledge in the field or other colleagues, and this is what is informing the methods that we're proposing in this application. So that's what this first bullet means. The second bullet is the size, scope, and duration of the proposed project. Again, size, we're going to look at a sampling of all of the HBCU institutions in the country. We're going to look at the HBCUs in a certain part of the country. We're going to take a look at not only HBCUs, but maybe first-generation students. So you need to define who the size of your project, the size of your project, and to me that still goes with scope, size, and scope. And then the duration of the proposed project. Maybe you need only 1 year to do one aspect of your research project or your study or your survey. And as I said in the beginning, or you may need 3 years to first identify the scope or your target group, and then you're going to track them and interview them in the second year and gather all that data. And then in the third year, you're going to take a look at some comparison data and write up what your findings are. So you determine, based on the activities and your methods, how long you're going to need funding and who's going to be targeted with that funding. The seventh criterion is pretty straightforward. The reviewers or this criterion is going to look at the high quality and the design of your project. And some of these bullets in number 7 overlap with your narrative responses to the previous criteria. So there's going to be overlap. If your project holds together well, there should be always some linking back to the criteria before, and it should link to the criteria that are yet to come. So you're looking at the quality of how you've designed the project. The plan of operation should have an effective plan of management that ensures proper and efficient administration of the project. This criterion tends to focus or imply that you're looking at an institutional research project where you're dealing with more people and faculty committees and probably deans or other participants. But even as an individual applicant, you need to speak to how you are going to manage your project. So just because you're an individual, don't gloss over bullet number 2. It's still equally important to tell the readers that you have a clear understanding, that you are accountable for how this project is going to be run, and it's going to be efficient. I'm going to use my resources effectively. So individual, organization, public or private, consortium, everybody needs to have an effective management plan articulated in this plan of operation. Again, a clear description of how the objectives of the project relate to the purposes of the program. And I would keep repeating or making connection to how your project really relates to these priorities that we have announced, in addition to the whole scope of what it means to be a part of international education as authorized under Title VI and or Fulbright Hays. Your plan of operation should spell out how you plan to use the resources and the personnel to achieve each objective that you propose in the project. Now, these IRS grants obviously are not really healthy, but you can leverage the monies that you are requesting to accomplish what you set forth in the application. And we'll get to this more closely when I talk about the budget, but because this program does not have a restricted indirect cost rate, a lot of the funding that you will be requesting will be allocated to based on the discretion of the institutions in the indirect cost rate. And that has been a concern that many of you have expressed to me over the past several weeks, but unfortunately I don't have a magic indirect cost rate lower by rate 1, and I cannot do anything about that because any program that does not have a negotiated, restricted indirect cost rate, the government, we, the Department of Education, we cannot interfere. We have no purview over that. If a program has an unrestricted rate, which this program has, then you're literally at the mercy of your institution to either appeal to them for the purposes of your project to charge a lower indirect cost rate, or you just have to, it's just part of the reality of how these things work. So I said all of that to say that if you have a budget that has a very high indirect cost rate, that's going to force you to be very strategic about what line items you do request in the budget. So are you going to use your resources more for the salary for the project director or for wages for graduate assistants? Or are you going to use the resources more so you can travel to conduct interviews and meet with institutions? So this is what drives that particular bullet, the way the applicant plans to use its resources and personnel to achieve each objective. You're going to have to be very strategic on very limited funding. And the last bullet, a clear description of how the applicant will provide equal access and treatment for eligible project participants who are members of groups that have been traditionally underrepresented, such as members of racial or ethnic minority groups, women, and handicapped persons. Yes, so you need to, most organizations, most institutions have a statement as part of their institutional mission statement and literature. They will have this description. So you can talk about that in the narrative, not can. You must talk about it in this criterion, and you need to add that section or provide that statement again in responding to the GEPA requirements, the GEPA requirements. So you're going to repeat this or enhance this elsewhere in the application, in the appendices. Your GEPA statement responds to this, and this criterion, you need to talk about it in your plan of operation, because I guess what they're saying is when you accept federal funds, then you need to provide access to these folks, these groups, when you in your plans of operations or in your project. If you are an individual, you can it will be not applicable, except, and I make this caveat, if you are going to, as an individual applicant, but you are going to be reaching out to other resources to help you do your project, then this is also applicable. You can say, I'm an individual applicant, but in conducting this project, I intend to reach out to X groups of people to help me do this. So everybody should have a response to that last bullet. Criterion number 8, and again, these are very straightforward. The qualifications of the project director if one is to be used. And a project director, and I guess I can address this later, but since it's popping in my mind now, usually on these grants, discretionary grants, one project director should be listed on the SF424 because that's the number, only one person can be put into our grant system as the project director. You can have colleagues help you on this project. You can put them on the budget to support you, but as far as we are concerned, there's only one project director for the project. You want to talk about, in number 8, the qualifications of other key personnel to be used in the project. And key personnel are your colleagues who will be doing the researching, people who will be doing the interviewing, what kind of skills, what expertise do they have. Your evaluator, you will describe their expertise, external and internal evaluators. The time that each key personnel plans to commit to the project, the extent to which the applicant, and again, you are meeting that access bullet. You don't have to necessarily repeat verbatim. You can put a page reference to say, please see page X where we have previously discussed this. And you want to talk about evidence of past experience and training in fields related to the objectives of the project, as well as other information the applicant provides. In other words, you're not a novice at this. This kind of research requires experience, it requires expertise, and so we want to let you know that we do have the requisite experience, track record, expertise to do what we say we are going to do in this project. Number 9, the budget and cost effectiveness is worth 5 points. The proposed budget is adequate to support the project activities. As simply said, it's a matter of scale. So your budget should reflect the scale of your project. No more, no less. Just be prudent and letting the readers know that this is what we need to accomplish what you have already read about in the previous 8 selection criteria. This is how much we need to accomplish this. And the costs are reasonable in relation to the objectives. The last criterion is the evaluation plan. And in this criterion, you're being evaluated on the quality of the evaluation plan for the project, and that the methods of evaluation are appropriate for the project, and to the extent possible are objective and produce data that are quantifiable. In your evaluation plan, an effective quality evaluation plan strikes a balance between product evaluation and process evaluation, because the ultimate goal of any evaluation plan is to help you to assess to what extent the implemented project resembles the planned project. That's what ultimately what you're trying to do, what you're trying to determine is whether what you actually comes out of all of this has any resemblance to what you propose. If your project is well defined and the objectives have been stated with clarity, then the evaluation plan should accomplish this. You'll say, yes, this is what we intended, it came out well, or if it comes out not so well, then your plan needs to reevaluate your evaluation plan. But a good evaluation plan should strike a balance between product evaluation and process evaluation. A product evaluation, also known as outcomes evaluation, impact evaluation, summative evaluation, that kind of evaluation enables you to determine the extent to which the project has achieved its objectives and that the accomplishments of objectives can be attributed to the project. In other words, the objectives were met because of this project. So that's product evaluation. And the benefits of product evaluation are it requires objectives that are clear and measurable. And it forces you, the applicant, to examine the clarity of your objectives, the ease of measurement, and the possibility or feasibility of achieving the objectives. So those are the benefits of product evaluation. Process evaluation, on the other hand, examines the conduct of the project. Process evaluation uses procedures that determine whether the project has been conducted in a manner consistent with the plan. And it also looks at the relationship of different project activities to the overall effectiveness of the project. So your plan really should have both of those components or aspects. And I have a checklist for you for evaluation. And some more benefits of process evaluation. It allows you to examine the costs and benefits of the different aspects of your evaluation. And process evaluation allows for you to redirect your efforts if necessary. If you go down the road and you see that this isn't quite where we need to be going, you have time to redirect your resources. In other words, I don't need to make as many trips to conduct these interviews as I thought. I need to redirect those resources in looking at the data that I already have. So that's changing the process, redirecting your resources so you can make sure you are achieving the results that you're shooting for. And your methods of evaluation are a process evaluation will allow you to determine whether the methods are appropriate for the project. and to the extent possible are objective. So simple checklist for your evaluation. It covers product and process. It tells who will be performing the evaluation and how the evaluation will be, evaluators will be selected. It defines your particular evaluation parameters and criteria. It describes your data gathering methods. It explains any test instruments or questionnaires to be used. All of that will be incorporated into your plan. It will describe the process of data analysis, and it will show how evaluation will be used for program improvements or project improvements. And it describes, it also describes the deliverables. So in your evaluation plan, there should be some statement, some indication that we have this deliverable plan, and this will come out of the evaluation, not just the evaluation report, but some tangible, substantive deliverable as a result of your research on dual language immersion or outcomes of international education. And the last two criteria, number 11, adequacy of resources. This talks about the facilities that the applicant plans to use, whether they are adequate. And I believe, and it's not parens here, but I think the criterion in its entirety says other than the library. You're to talk about the facilities that you plan to use. Describe to the readers that this is what our resources are in terms of facilities, my lab, whatever, other than the library. Make sure that you give a clear description of those facilities. And that you can talk about or describe the equipment and supplies that the applicant plans to use. And some definitions about equipment, and we'll get to that in the budget. Equipment in terms of the Department of Education. Equipment is any item that has an acquisition cost of less than $5,000. I mean, more than $5,000. A supply item is anything that has a unit acquisition cost less than $5,000. So in other words, your budget can include computer devices, recorders. We can talk about specific things, but you have latitude to include equipment and supplies in your budget. And then number 12 is entered here because on the reviewer's technical review form, there will be a line that says dual language immersion programs give this application additional 5 points, or it will say outcomes of international education programs. They'll check which one your application is addressing, and it will have a box for 5 points. But you're not putting a separate discussion at the end of this to talk about these. That's not what this is illustrating. You will have talked about these items, one or the other, in your discussion of these 11 previous selection criteria. And speaking of budgets, the budget categories for any federal application, and I couldn't do a screenshot of the ED 524, but hopefully you are familiar with it, or when you, on your own, when you download this form, you will see these categories on that ED 524. In the first column, you'll see personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment, supplies, contractual, and I put NA because typically for grants, even if you're going to hire an evaluator is really not a contract, so to speak, as in procurement. Contractual to us, when we use that term, we're talking about procurement. So if you have an external evaluator, you would put those costs under other. So contractual, NA, certainly you're not building any facilities or building anything to conduct your activities in, so these are non-construction projects, so that's NA. Other is the catch-all for other things other than the travel, equipment, supplies, and personnel. Your other needs will be under here, typically wage positions like graduate assistant. I need a graduate assistant for 10 hours at $15 an hour a week. That will go under other. So then you would total up all of these things, and those are your direct costs, and then your indirect costs, which, again, we've already talked about. This program has unrestricted indirect costs, so it's not capped at 8% for this program. Training stipends, NA, you will notice in the regulations for this program that an unallowable costs relate to training of teachers and students. So there are no training activity costs in this grant. And then on the ED 524, you will total your costs. Now on that ED 524, you will have this column, and then it goes across and it says, I think, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, or year 3. Well, it goes out to 5, but you will fill in what you are requesting in each of these categories for year 1, in each of these categories for year 2, and in each of these categories for year 3. That is if you're requesting a 3-year project. And some selected definitions from Part 200, which are the Uniform Administrative Requirements. Some of you might remember them as the OMB cost principles. That's the old terminology for these, but now they're called the Uniform Administrative Requirements. And direct costs are the typical costs charged directly for federal award. And you can see the different categories for direct costs. Reasonableness, when we look at if you're recommended for funding, or even when the readers look at your budget, they're looking to see whether what you're proposing is reasonable. And that means compensation for employees engaged in the work of the project. Is it reasonable? And we determine reasonableness by saying, even if they were not working on this project, it's similar. That same cost would be very consistent with what we would pay them for similar work. If there isn't a comparable employee position or work at your institution for this particular position, then reasonableness is determined by what would be paid for similar work in the labor market. Compensation for personal services. The general definition in the administrative requirements says that this means compensation for personal services including remuneration paid currently or on an accrued basis for services of employees that the employees rendered during the period of performance under the federal award, including but not necessarily limited to wages and salaries. So compensation can have some other meanings. If you're going to propose publishing or having a document come out of this project, you are allowed to charge those publication costs for electronic and print media, including the distribution, promotion, and general handling. Those are all allowable costs. And just I wanted to, if you are recommended for funding and you produce a publication as a result of this IRS grant, you will receive with your grant award notification the terminology or the notation or the caveat that you have to attribute, give credit to the federal government for that particular publication. So there is citation language that you will be provided for anything that you produce as a result of this funding. Again, equipment, an item or device that has a unit acquisition cost greater than $5,000. You're allowed to put on your budget travel costs. The general definition is the expenses for transportation, lodging, subsistence, and related items incurred by you when you're in a travel mode for this project, for official business, meaning you're conducting the activities for this project. Again, publication and printing costs are allowed. We've talked about the indirect cost rate. Unfortunately, again, we cannot restrict it because the program doesn't allow. And again, I referred to these unallowable costs. This program does not allow you to use funds for training students and training teachers. And the appendices in Part 4, you will again include these: the curriculum vitae, the position descriptions, letters of support, 3 to 5, or if you need 6, you may, and then these other things. Okay, the forms and certifications. Again, the SF424 is the cover sheet for the grant application, and I pulled out a number of items that tend to trip people up when they are filling that 424 out, when they're completing it. The type of submission, it's an application. So when you pull the form from the web forms and grants.gov, the application 424, the first box asks for type of submission. It is not a pre-application, it is an application. So you will check the box that says application. The type of applicant is new. Even if you had an IRS grant in the past, we are not continuing that funding. This is a new competition, so the type of application is new. Item number 6, the date received by the state. You will leave that blank or put not applicable because this program does not require that you send the application to the state for intergovernmental review. So item number 6, not applicable or leave blank. Item number 8F, it says name and contact information of the person to be contacted on matters involving this application. That person should be the project director. So the project director information goes in number 8. Unless there is someone on your campus or in your organization that says, no, I need to be there, then I don't get involved with that. So if it should be the project director, but if the protocols on your campus or the protocols in your organization require that someone else be there, that is also fine. That person's name should and must go there. The next item, item number 12, the funding opportunity number. That's the number that was announced on the top sheet of the application package and the number that's in grants.gov. The funding opportunity number is ED, capital ED, hyphen capital grants, hyphen 062817, in other words, June 28th, 2017, 062817-001. So on the SF424, when you see funding opportunity number, just pull that number from grants.gov or from the cover page of the application booklet itself. Item number 13, the competition identifier number, that's 84.017A, which is the International Research and Studies Program. Item number 18. Item 18 asks, that's the section that's titled Estimated Funding, and it has a $sign next to it. In A, where it says federal, you are entering just the first year amount of money that you're requesting from us. Even though your project is for 3 years, put only the first year request in there. And that's because when the grants come in, the money is pulled off of the 424 and it's populated in the G5. And so we want to know what you're requesting for the first year. I think people get a little bit skeptical. They think, well, if I put the first year, they won't realize I really want 3 years worth of money. That won't matter. We know from other information in here that you are requesting more than 1 year, but we only want you to put the federal request for the first year in 18A. Item number 19, you're going to mark box C, and item 19 is program is not covered by Executive Order 12372. That means you're not required to send the application to your state for them to review it. So you'll check box C. And item number 21, the authorized representative. Again, typically this is the fiscal person on your campus or the fiscal person in your organization, because when this grant is set up in G5, and if you're fortunate enough to receive a grant, that person is one of the authorized payees. In other words, we will take that information for the authorized representative. They will be in the grant G5 system, and if you're recommended for funding, they will get the information telling them how to go in and draw down funds. So that's the authorized representative. But again, if that person in your organization is somebody else and wants that authority, then you would obviously put that person's name there, with the understanding that whoever's name is there, that's the person that will be have access to drawing down the funds. The supplemental information for the SF424, now that really is the information for the project director, because we need that information not only to set up the project director information in G5, we also use that information to set the information and base record up in our International Resource Information System, our performance reporting system. So the supplemental form should have the information for the project director. And then the other items, I think, are self-explanatory. We've covered those. If you have questions, you can follow up with me offline. And Rick. Now, the application selection process. When we receive the applications, we will screen them. We will look through them as they come into grants.gov, but then they are migrated over to the G5 system, where I can look at them, and my colleagues or whoever's helping to screen these, we will screen the applications to make sure that they are complete. 2 weeks after the closing date is August 14th, we will hopefully give ourselves a few days to screen the applications, and I am anticipating that the peer review will start probably August 22nd or maybe a few days after that. It will go through the end of August, probably the first week in September, depending on how many applications we receive. Typically, these peer review panels consist of persons who have expertise and experience relevant to this program specifically and to international education programs overall, and especially an understanding of the topics of the competitive preference priorities. We are hoping to use 9 reviewers, which means 3 sets of panels, 3 panels. The reviewers' technical review forms, the same criteria that we went through on these slides, those are the same words and bullet points that they will be expected to evaluate your application against. And we will provide successful and unsuccessful applicants their technical review forms after we conclude the grant-making activities. This process requires a preparation of a slate of awards for the Secretary of Education to review. It will be prepared at the IFLE level. It will be reviewed and approved, reviewed by Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary Lenore Iaffe Garcia, who will then submit this slate into what we call internal clearance to be reviewed by other offices, and then ultimately reviewed by Secretary DeVos. Once those slates are reviewed and cleared, we will obligate the monies through our G5 system, and this all happens along with congressional notification, so the Congress has the opportunity to notify you first, and then we will take it from there with asking for revised budgets and getting you set on your way so you can have these grants no later, well, has to be before September 30th. So I am anticipating that you will know the outcome of the competition by mid-September. Some application quick tips, and certainly there are more than these. Make sure that you address all selection criteria, and to the extent possible, follow the sequence as listed in the application package. This facilitates an easy read for the peer reviewers. Bear in mind that the application narrative is a story presented through the lens of 12 qualitative factors, and really not 12. That 12th bullet was just a list of the priorities. So you're telling your story through those 11 criteria that we went through. And you should tell a clear, concise, and compelling story about your proposed research project or your study or your survey and why it is important. You should develop a budget that clearly is in alignment with the project framework and the activities to be conducted. In designing your project, writing your project, obtain input from colleagues in the field about the feasibility of your project and to share ideas. Proofread your application multiple times. There's nothing more distracting when reviewers are going through several applications in one sitting to have to struggle through proofreading errors or things that are distracting. So proofread your application multiple times. And I would suggest that you have the proposal read by persons who are experts in the field, as well as those who are not as familiar with the research project or the study or the survey or with your topic. If it's written clearly, both groups, whether they're experts or just have no knowledge, so to speak, of what you're proposing, both should come away with a clear understanding of what you're proposing. And it's also very helpful to include a list of acronyms, possibly up near the table of contents, before the abstract. Somewhere in your proposal, include acronyms because it will help the readers understand the references that you're making throughout the application. Again, In preparing to submit your application, make sure, and I'm hopeful that all of you have registered on grants.gov by now. As you're working and you're writing your application, make sure you back it up in case there are any computer issues, and do not wait until the last minute to submit, bearing in mind that grants.gov is a federal-wide system and it has a high volume of users. So do not wait until the last minute because you're going to encounter slow systems, and then you don't want that 4:30, 1 second after 4:30 to pop up, because the system will definitely not allow you to submit after the deadline date. And these are just some other websites that you can go to at your leisure. And if you have any further questions or you need information, I'm here and available to you. My email address is cheryl.gibbs@ed.gov, and my direct phone number is area code 202-453-5690. And if you have any questions, Angela is ready to roll.
So our first question is, are the only options to submit a grant for DLI or International Ed post-secondary? Will no other proposals be accepted?
We can accept them, but quite honestly, when you have folks submitting, getting 5 extra points, it's going to be a challenge, but we certainly will accept them. I'm not going to say do not submit it.
All right. Can applicants apply to both competitive priorities? And actually, someone wants to clarify on the total points because they've done the calculations and it only adds to 105.
I had it 105 on one page and 110 on another.
I did the math.
It's 105, including the priority points?
Yeah, because you only get one section, right?
Yes, yeah. Okay, it's 105. Sorry.
Can the research be,
and the question is, can you apply to both?
Right.
Yes, you can submit 2 different applications if you want to respond to both priorities.
Right. Can the research be focused on evaluating a 10-year program?
A 10-year program about international programs? You need, we can talk offline because that's not clear to me about what you mean about that scope.
Mm-hmm. If we submit separate proposals for the 2 competitive priorities, can we win both?
Why are you being greedy? I don't have an answer to that. It all depends. I don't have an answer to that.
If the proposed research project is an evaluation and we specify that, do we still need an evaluation plan?
If your proposed research is an evaluation of what? You still have to, if your proposed research is an evaluation of a certain topic or group or target group, yes, you still need to have something that speaks to how you're going to evaluate your own evaluation project.
When you speak of individuals applying, who is eligible? Are graduate students eligible to apply as individuals?
Yes, a graduate student may apply if said graduate student is going to respond to the purpose of the program and respond to what we're asking. Yes.
Is there a budget template?
For outside of the ED 524, if you're using, you have to use the ED 524, and the instructions say for Part C, which is the detailed budget, you do not have to use a template. You would have to just attach pages that describe the details of whatever you are requesting in your budget.
Can we submit through grants.gov workspace?
I don't know what the workspace means, but you certainly need to submit through grants.gov, and the instructions are in the application package.
If we hear mid-September, when will we be able to start expending funds?
When they're obligated.
Okay, you want to?
When the funds are obligated, that means you will see the funds in your account, and when you are notified in September, all of the obligations and all of the grant-making activities will have been completed. So by mid-September, you'll have access to your grant.
Why has the program not been offered? Why has the program not offered this competition since 2009?
We had no money.
Can funds be used for training of staff, so not teachers or students, if this is relevant to the research methods?
Yes.
Can student travel expenses be included in the budget in any way?
No.
Is this application to register at grants.gov through Workspace? Should we indicate whether we are a novice application, page 72? Is there a competitive preference provided to those of us who have experience in the field but have not yet received?
No, this is not. The government uses those words novice and new and continuations in very specific ways. There are very specific definitions that tie to that, tied to those definitions. This is not, you're not a novice applicant. I'm sorry that you have not had support under the program in the past, but the application is a new application under this funding opportunity.
You mentioned funds can't be used for training students. Does this mean course creation cannot be part of a research project?
This is not the scope of this competition. It is not supporting instructional materials. It is not supporting course creation. And any other questions we can take offline, but the NIA is very clear about what is being solicited and what is not.
Regarding the evaluation, what were the two types that were mentioned as most preferred?
I said you should have a balance. I didn't say what was most preferred. I said a good evaluation plan will strike a balance between process and product.
If the institution approves a lower indirect rate, how should we document that so it doesn't appear to be cost share?
Well, you won't submit summary part B with your budget, and you will indicate, you will notice on the ED 524 cover sheet below that last category, number 12, there's a section that says indirect cost instructions. And it has everything you need to fill out to show us what your indirect cost rate is. But you will not be misconstrued as cost share. That you're cost share.
Can you confirm that the $101,000 budget request cap includes all direct and indirect costs?
I say 1,000. The maximum estimated cap in the closing date notice is 101 or 107? 101.7 something. And it does not include indirect costs. There is nothing in this application that suggests anyone's indirect cost rate because this program does not have a restricted indirect cost rate. So the amount that's in the closing date notice, that is what we're suggesting is the limit. Now, if your particular institution or organization, for example, has a 40% indirect cost rate, then 40% of that 101, that goes towards the indirect cost. The rest is what you have to work with to allocate for the other line items in the budget.
Could we use budget for material development?
If you're speaking about instructional materials development, no. If you're talking about developing a survey to support your project or an interview protocol form to support this project, those are allowable. But if you're planning to take this grant to say, I want to develop a textbook on Arabic in middle schools, that will not be a competitive application because that is not what we're asking.
So the next question is an outside evaluator required?
You can use internal or external evaluation. We are just requesting that the project be evaluated. Again, an external evaluator, it all depends on your resources that you have available to you. So those are internal decisions that you need to make. If you feel that you want to use the grant to get an external evaluator, you may. But all we require, or all that criterion requires, is that you have your plan evaluated.
Okay, our next question is, what are the required start dates and end dates for the research?
They need to start within the fiscal year that you have the money start. So these grants will start on October 1. The first budget period is October 1, 2017. It will end September 30th, September 18th. So you put your timeline within that fiscal year.
All right, and back to the instructional materials question, we just want to confirm that proposals to create materials will not be entertained even if those materials supported a dual language immersion program.
Hold on 1 second. I don't see anything in the notice that would support that, but I'm not going to tell you not to submit it. But it does. It's not an actual. If you were going to do, if the materials already exist, and you want to do a research project on how those materials fare in a certain school district with a certain target populations of existing instructional materials, and you're doing a research on how those projects or how that material is being used and to what effect it has on that population, that would be appropriate. I'm still maintaining that it would not necessarily be appropriate for you to ask for money to create these instructional materials. But if you want to proceed, I'm not going to tell you not to submit it. But I just don't know what else to say.
Okay, and we have a person who'd like to double check if you need to submit a position description if you are planning to hire a graduate student assistant.
Yes. What is that graduate student assistant going to be doing in terms of your research project? Helpful to know, yes.
Okay, our next question is, do applicants need to go in depth with regards to the GEPRA, GPRA requirements, and what are those requirements?
No, the GEPRA, that's Government Performance and Results Act, not to be confused with GPA, which you do have to address. The GEPRA measure page in the application is for the public's information only. We need to inform the public that the Department of Education, our office in particular, is required to collect information through our grant programs to respond to the OMB GEPRA measures. Those are our responsibility. Those measures are for us to report on. You do not have to, but the information must be included in all materials that we send to the public.
Just a reminder, we will be sending a link to the recording of this webinar as well as a copy of the slides to everybody who registered. So you should all receive those this evening. The next question is, does someone need to have an institutional IRB approved before applying for this grant?
No, I think that's more appropriate for programs like the doctoral dissertation research abroad program, but not this program.
Okay, moving on. Can an organization and a higher education institution apply as a consortium?
Yes.
Okay. One moment. We have a somewhat technical grants.gov question, so I don't know if Cheryl will be able to respond, but we'll see. Can grants.gov accept 2 proposals from one organization? The instructions mention that uploading a new document will update that file as the most current. So should the proposals be combined into one file?
I would contact grants.gov. I don't want to give you, that's what you're describing, I thought, was when you needed to correct an application that you needed to upload a second one. But to submit 2 different ones, that's a question for them, please.
Okay, our next question, what about intellectual property and copyright? In other words, are research results properties of the researchers or the government?
This question I had come up with in relation to some other issue, and I will get back to you because there is a specific response that our Office of the General Counsel provided.
Okay, could you go over the deliverable plan checklist again, since it didn't appear in the slides, but I think you mentioned it during the webinar.
I think you're referring to the evaluation plan checklist. And I said that the evaluation checklist should cover the product and process evaluation strategies. It will tell who will be performing the evaluation and how the evaluators will be selected. It will define your own evaluation criteria within the context of the plan, your data gathering methods, any test instruments, the process for data analysis. So it will show how the evaluation will be used for program improvement. And I think this is, you're referring to this last bullet, your evaluation plan will describe or articulate that you will indeed have a deliverable that comes out of your evaluation activity.
Okay, we have a number of other questions, so we're going to stay on and get these answered for you. Can a research project focus on one state as a case study?
Yes.
Let's see, can a consortia application include a foreign university?
I don't know what added value that has in the context because there's asking how, the second criterion, well, they're both very specific, U.S. specific. They both say, in some regard, for the second criterion, it says the international education outcomes on U.S. post-secondary students. So I don't know the context, whether you're comparing U.S. students to study abroad for foreign students. These kinds of questions I need to talk to you offline, but my first impression is to say I wouldn't think that would be applicable because it's the criteria are very specific to mention U.S. students and U.S. pre-K through 12.
Okay, next question. Is there a specific definition of less commonly taught languages per the announcement?
If we use that definition as we apply it to our other Title VI programs, it's any language except Italian, no, Spanish, French, German. Anything else would be less commonly taught.
Okay, if a project involves subcontracts to members of a research consortium or partnership, would you list those costs under Other on the Ed 524 form?
That's the sticky wicket because the IRS program doesn't allow subcontracts. So if you put those costs on there, you probably need to kind of camouflage them under Other, because if it's flagged, if it's really clear that you're awarding subcontracts, that presents an issue.
Okay, so we discussed the dates before. Would there be a deadline for the project to be completed? Would it need to be completed in the same fiscal year, 2017, or what in terms of time frame? You need to begin the project in fiscal year 2017, but when would you need to have it completed by?
If you're talking about if you're only requesting funding for a single year? Your whole project scope, if you're requesting funding for 36 months, that's 3 years. So you have 3 years to do whatever your project activities are. The question is unclear. If you're requesting funding for only one budget period, that would mean, yes, you would have the support that starts on October 1, 2017, and your activity should be completed by September 30th, 2018, and then the final report, if you're recommended for funding, your final report to the department will be submitted into IRIS 90 days after September 30th, 2018. But it's unclear from your question whether you are talking about your whole project period request is just 1 year, or you're asking about a time frame within 3 years. That's not clear.
We have a couple of questions about where you can find these forms. I believe you should be able to find them on grants.gov.
Yes.
So check there. I believe you can search for them, or they should be linked.
There's a link on the page for the different application components, and you click on web forms, so you can download them from grants.gov.
Okay, we have some more questions, but they're very specific to individual projects. So if your question was not answered in the session today, you can email Cheryl, and she can give you a specific response. Otherwise, we'll wait for a couple more minutes to see if anyone else has a question that might apply to the whole applicant community, and otherwise we will sign off. So we'll hang around for a couple more minutes. So we have a question about the length of CVs. Should they be limited?
A reasonable length for CV would be probably 1 or 2 pages. Again, the department does not put a lot of restrictive language on certain parts of the application anymore. That's why there is no language to speak to that. But using what we do for other programs, a full page or full and a half page for the project director seems to be sufficient, and then a half page, 3/4 page for other persons. But again, I'm leaving it up to you with the caveat, as I said early on in the presentation. By the time the readers get to the end of the application, you need to be very careful about how much more you're putting on them to file through. So 1 or 2 pages but use your discretion.
We have another general question. Are there any sample proposals that applicants could take a look at?
Unfortunately, no. As I said, this program has not competed since 2009, and when those projects were received, they were received in grants.gov, as you are doing now, but those have long been retired or archived after their retention period. So it would have been nice, but unfortunately we do not have any.
So we have a question about how applicants actually start an application with grants.gov and what to do with DUN numbers and SAM and all of those administrative issues. So that information is actually contained in the application package, which is available on the website, which will be linked in the email that you'll get after today's webinar. So go to that Word document that is posted online, and all of that information is explained.
And it's on, more specifically, it's on pages 10, 11, and 12. But those kinds of questions, it's very clear when you go to the link.
And someone asked for the website, so I will put that in the chat window now. This is the website where you can find the application package. And you'll also be able to get the slides for the webinar. We're also going to email those out. If you are asking for the application website, that's grants.gov. So there are 2 different websites, one for the program and one for the actual application. And I'll put both of those in the chat window. So we haven't received any more general questions, so I think we're going to wrap up.
Thank you for joining us today, and I wish you all the best. And if you have any other questions, please do not hesitate to contact me.